I still remember the exact moment I felt my heart drop. It was late afternoon. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting golden lines on the floor. I had just come back from the grocery store when I saw them, my husband, the man I had trusted for nearly 30 years, standing in the living room, talking quietly with my son's fiancée. I don't even know what made me pause at the doorway. Maybe it was a sudden sense of dread, maybe it was instinct. But I froze, quietly watching, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The words weren't clear, but their closeness, the way they leaned toward each other, it was too much. I wanted to walk in, to confront him, to demand answers. But before I could move, I heard the soft footsteps in the hallway. My son, Elijah, he stood there, almost like a shadow, watching me. And when our eyes met, he whispered so quietly, I barely heard him, "Mom, I already know." I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. My chest tightened. My hands shook. And suddenly the house felt colder, emptier. I had no idea what to say. My mind raced. Betrayal, shock, confusion, pain. All at once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But instead, I just stood there, silent, watching, thinking, trying to hold on to the pieces of a life that suddenly felt fragile. That was the day I realized maybe I had thrown away so much without even noticing. I want to start at the beginning, before the day that broke me, before the moment I saw Elijah standing there, before the betrayal and the heartache, because you can't understand the depth of something unless you know what came before. I was born in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, stories, and secrets. Life was simple. My parents were gentle, hard-working people. They taught me the value of family, the importance of love, and the quiet strength that comes from patience. I met my husband when I was 22. He had a calm smile and a way of making everything feel safe. When he proposed, I didn't even hesitate. I just knew. We built a life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. We moved into a modest home, had 2 children, and filled our days with routines that slowly became traditions. Elijah, our eldest, was quiet, thoughtful, always careful with his words. I could see the weight of the world on him even as a boy. My daughter Hannah was the opposite, lively, fearless, loud laughter that could fill a room. And our home, despite the occasional tension or small fights, was warm, full of love, and, I thought, unbreakable. I devoted myself to my family. Every meal, every school project, every heartbreak, they were mine to carry alongside them. I never complained. I never thought about what I was giving up. I just did it because it felt right. I believed love could heal everything. I believed that loyalty and patience would protect us, keep our family together no matter what came our way. We had our share of struggles, of course. Money was tight at times. My husband and I disagreed about small things, decor, bills, which car to buy, but these were minor. I thought disagreements were normal, natural even. We always found our way back, and that gave me a sense of peace. I never imagined the cracks were deeper than they appeared. Elijah grew into a fine young man. He worked hard, studied late nights, and quietly carried burdens we often didn't notice. I was proud. And when he fell in love, when he met someone who made him smile in a way only true love can, I was happy. I wanted nothing more than his happiness. I thought I knew everything about our family, about our life. I thought I had learned the rhythm, the patterns, the small details that kept our world steady. But that was before the day I realized how fragile it all really was. Even before the betrayal, small things had begun to shift. A text message left open on Elijah's phone, a quiet argument I didn't witness, the way my husband sometimes stayed out later than usual. I noticed, of course, but I told myself it was nothing, just life, just routine. And then, the living room, the sunlight on the floor, that moment when everything changed. After that afternoon in the living room, something inside me shifted. It wasn't immediate. I didn't run to confront my husband. I didn't scream. I just stopped. I stopped expecting life to continue as it had. At first, it was subtle. I noticed small changes. The way my husband avoided certain conversations, the way he kept his phone close, almost too close, like it carried some secret I wasn't meant to see. And Elijah, he grew quieter, more distant. I could feel the tension like a low hum in the walls of our home. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe life was moving too fast. But every small detail seemed to confirm my fear. One evening, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The smell of onions and garlic filled the air. My husband came in, smiled, and leaned against the counter. But there was a hesitation in his eyes I couldn't ignore. Everything okay? I asked softly, trying not to sound accusing. Yeah, just tired, he said. His voice was low, almost too casual, but I saw it. The way he looked past me, like I was invisible. The way he avoided my gaze. My heart sank, but I said nothing. I just nodded and went back to chopping. A few days later, I noticed a small, almost insignificant thing. A coffee mug in the living room. Not mine, not Elijah's, not anyone in the house. I put it aside and tried to convince myself it was nothing, but little things kept happening. Notes left carelessly on the table, messages on the shared family tablet that disappeared too quickly for me to read, an occasional laugh from the hallway that stopped when I entered. One night, I went to Elijah's room. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. I didn't want to startle him. Hey, you okay? I asked gently. He looked up, and his eyes were heavy with something I didn't understand. I'm fine, Mum, he said, but his voice carried a weight, a weariness that made my chest tighten. I sat down beside him, waiting for him to speak, and eventually, he did. It's just complicated, he murmured. I nodded slowly, saying nothing. I knew from years of raising him that sometimes words weren't ready to come, sometimes you had to wait. The next morning, the tension in the house became more visible. Breakfast was quiet. My husband read the newspaper. Elijah stared at his cereal, and I poured coffee for everyone, trying to keep the atmosphere calm, but I could feel it, an invisible thread of unease running through us. Every clink of a spoon, every rustle of a chair seemed amplified. Then came the first real confrontation, not explosive, not dramatic, just quiet, almost invisible. I had folded the laundry and was putting it away when my husband entered the room. He glanced at the clothes I had set on the bed. I don't know why you bother, he said quietly. I froze, folding a shirt in my hands. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice calm. He shrugged, looking away. Just everything. You do so much, but does it even matter anymore? I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to argue, to tell him that of course it mattered, that every little thing I did was for this family, but the words got stuck in my throat. I realized he wasn't talking about the laundry. He was talking about me, about us, about everything we had built. Later that week, I found a small envelope on the dining table. No name, no return address, just a note inside. I can't keep pretending. My hands trembled as I held it. I didn't know if it was meant for me or someone else. I didn't want to ask. I just folded it and placed it in the drawer, trying to breathe normally, trying to tell myself that maybe I had imagined too much, but the tension kept building. Conversations became shorter, words more clipped, laughter faded from our home. Even Hannah noticed. Mom, is something wrong? She asked one evening. Her big brown eyes were full of worry. I forced a smile, brushing her hair back gently. Nothing, sweetheart, just busy. But inside, I knew it wasn't nothing. Something had shifted, and I couldn't turn back the clock. Then came the first direct confrontation with Elijah's fiancée. It was subtle the way she spoke, a casual comment that carried an edge. Your mother, she's so involved, she said one afternoon, arranging flowers on the table. Sometimes I feel crowded. I wanted to say something. I wanted to defend myself, but I realized she wasn't talking about the flowers. She was talking about me, about my presence, my love, my care. I smiled softly, nodding. I just want everyone to feel at home, I said quietly. She didn't respond. She just looked away, her lips pressed together, her eyes distant. And in that moment, I felt a quiet ache, the kind that seeps in slowly, the kind that makes you question everything you thought was secure. Small incidents continued, misplaced items, forgotten plans, a text message from Elijah that seemed like it was meant to hurt, though he didn't know it. One night, I sat by the window, watching the rain fall softly. The drops tapped against the glass like a heartbeat I couldn't match. I thought about all the years I had given to this family, all the sacrifices I had made, and for the first time, a creeping fear entered my mind. Was it enough? I didn't know. I didn't know if love and patience were enough to hold a family together. I didn't know if my husband still cared, if Elijah still saw me as a safe place, if the home I had built was crumbling without my notice. I tried to talk to my husband about it. One evening I found him in the study, staring at the wall as if it held the answers he couldn't speak. Can we talk? I asked softly. He looked at me, eyes tired, almost hollow. About what? About us. About everything. He shook his head. There's nothing to talk about. I felt the walls close in. Nothing to talk about? After 30 years? After everything we had shared? The words I wanted to say tangled in my throat, choked by disbelief. And then I realized something even more painful. I wasn't the only one noticing. Elijah, my boy, was feeling it too. I could see it in the way he avoided meals, in the way he sometimes just sat quietly in his room, staring at the floor. He was carrying a burden I didn't know how to lift. I found myself walking the house at night, lingering in the corners, checking on them both, not out of suspicion. No, it was worse than that. Out of fear. Fear that my family was slipping away from me, one quiet moment at a time. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fights, no shouting, no slamming doors, just silence. A silence that screamed louder than any argument ever could. I remember one night in particular. Elijah came into my room after everyone had gone to bed. He sat beside me on the edge of my bed, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Yes, sweetheart?" I asked. I don't know what to do," he whispered. And in that moment, I realized that whatever was happening, whatever was coming, it was bigger than small misunderstandings or misplaced words. It was breaking him, and if it was breaking him, what did that mean for all of us? I wanted to reach out, to fix it, to make it all right, but I didn't know how, and so I sat there, holding his hand in the dark, listening to his quiet breathing, feeling the helplessness settle deep inside me. From that night on, the tension became a quiet, unspoken thing in the house. Every meal, every glance, every passing moment carried the weight of unspoken truths. I started noticing more. Late-night phone calls, whispered conversations in the kitchen that stopped when I entered, small smiles that didn't reach the eyes, and every time, my heart ached with the knowledge that life as I had known it was changing. The worst part was the waiting to see what would happen next, the waiting to discover what betrayal or hurt might be revealed, and in that waiting, every small detail took on enormous weight. I found myself lying awake at night, replaying moments in my mind, moments that had seemed insignificant before, now heavy with meaning. Why did he linger in the hallway? Why did Elijah's fiancée avoid my gaze? Why did the note disappear? The questions spun endlessly, a quiet storm inside me that I could neither calm nor escape, and slowly, inexorably, the truth began to take shape. I wasn't ready for it, but it was coming. It happened on a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that usually felt peaceful, safe, ordinary. I had been tidying the living room, folding blankets, straightening pillows. The sun streamed through the windows, warm and gentle, like it had done every day for years. I thought about going into the kitchen to make tea, but then I heard voices, not soft whispers or casual conversation, but words I wasn't meant to hear. My heart caught in my chest. I moved closer, careful, silent, drawn by a feeling I couldn't name. It was my husband and someone else, Elijah's fiancée. I froze in the doorway, the world narrowing to the room in front of me. They were close, too close, laughing quietly, leaning toward one another in a way that made my stomach turn. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My body betrayed me. I wanted to scream, to run, to grab him by the arm and demand answers, but instead I just stood there, watching. My heart pounded, my hands shook, and I felt something inside me fracture, like a glass finally breaking under too much pressure. Then it happened. My husband reached for her hand, not in a fatherly way, not in a friendly way, in a way that only one person could reach for someone they shouldn't. Time seemed to stop. I blinked, disbelieving, hoping that the light or the shadows or my own eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. My husband, my life partner of 30 years, was betraying me. I wanted to speak, to call out, to make it stop, but my voice was gone. My mind raced. How long had this been going on? How could I not have noticed? Every late-night call, every whisper, every subtle shift. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. And then I heard a small creak in the hallway. Elijah, my son, standing there, watching. I don't know if he had seen it before, or if this was the moment it finally hit him. His face was pale, eyes wide, hurt and disbelief etched across every line of his young face. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just looked at me, and I looked at him, and in that silent moment, I realized something terrible. He had seen enough already. He had known in some way, and had been carrying this pain silently. I felt my knees weaken. I sank to the floor, clutching the edge of the doorway for support. The room seemed to spin around me. I wanted to run, to escape, to disappear, but I couldn't. The truth was all around me, impossible to ignore. I tried to speak. How could you? The words came out a whisper, barely audible. My husband froze, then stepped back, guilt flashing in his eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said softly, but it was too late. The words, the actions, the betrayal, they had already done their work. My heart was shattered. Elijah's fiancée looked at me, her eyes wide, startled. Maybe she hadn't expected me to see. Maybe she hadn't thought of me at all. But in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about my husband. This was about trust, about love, about every little thing I had given to this family. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him until he understood the weight of what he'd done. But I couldn't. I just sat there, numb, my chest heavy with grief. Elijah stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence. "Dad, what are you doing?" It wasn't accusatory. It was simple, raw, honest. A son who had trusted his father, seeing him fall short of everything he believed in. My husband's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to form words, but none came. I felt a rush of anger, yes, but more than that, sadness. The kind of sadness that sinks deep into your bones, into the parts of you that you thought were unbreakable. I realized that the life I had built, the love I had poured into my family, could be undone in a single afternoon. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I remember leaving the room, walking to the stairs, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. I remember standing at the top, looking down at the living room, and feeling the enormity of what had just occurred. I wanted to confront him. I wanted answers. I wanted apologies. But what would they have meant? Could words ever repair the betrayal of trust? Could explanations ever bring back the sense of safety I had once felt? Elijah came to me later that evening. He was silent, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. We sat together, hand in hand, in the quiet of the study, trying to make sense of the chaos. I don't know what to do, Mum, he whispered. "You'll be okay, my love," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We'll figure it out together." But deep down, I knew that nothing would be the same. Our family, the one I had worked so hard to protect, was fractured, and the fracture ran deeper than I had ever imagined. The following days were a blur. My husband avoided me, avoiding the eyes that had caught him in the act. Elijah withdrew further into himself, hiding his hurt, protecting me in his own quiet way. And I wandered through the house like a ghost, seeing the life we had lived reflected in fragments, in moments, in memories that now felt tainted. I started looking for answers, not outside, but within. I asked myself questions I didn't want to hear. Had I been blind? Had I ignored the signs? Had I missed something essential in our relationship? The truth was painful. I had missed things. I had ignored whispers of doubt. I had assumed love, trust, and years of marriage were enough to protect us, and now I knew they weren't. One evening, I found myself in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the garden I had planted years ago. The flowers were blooming, unaware of the heartache inside the house. It was almost cruel, how life continued, how beauty persisted while my heart felt fractured. My husband came in, cautiously. He didn't sit. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if it can be fixed," I admitted softly. And in that moment, I realized something even more important than anger or betrayal. I realized that sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering the truth. It's facing it. It's acknowledging the pain, sitting with it, and deciding what comes next. I remember that night lying awake, thinking about every memory, every shared smile, every small moment of love we had ever had. And I realized I had given so much. I had loved with my whole heart. And while that love hadn't protected me from betrayal, it had built resilience inside me. It had prepared me to face the truth without losing myself completely. The turning point wasn't just the moment I saw them together. It was the moment I understood that life isn't always fair, that people make mistakes, that love and trust can be broken, and that sometimes the hardest thing we can do is to continue living, to continue loving, to continue caring, even when the world feels like it has shifted beneath our feet. Elijah and I began to speak more openly in those days. He shared his fears, his anger, his sadness. I shared mine. We cried together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with quiet words of reassurance. It was painful, yes, but it was also a beginning, a fragile, trembling beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. I realized something profound. Betrayal doesn't have to define the end of everything. It can mark a turning point, a moment of clarity, of growth, of understanding. I wasn't sure what the future held for our family. I wasn't sure if trust could ever be fully restored, but I knew one thing: we could face it together, slowly, gently, one step at a time. And in that slow, quiet understanding, a small seed of hope began to take root. The days after that revelation were heavy, quiet, almost suspended in time. The house, which had always been our sanctuary, felt different. The walls seemed taller, the air thicker, and every sound, every laugh, every cough, every creak of the floorboards carried an undertone of tension. I spent a lot of time in the garden those days, tending to the flowers I had planted years ago. Gardening had always been my way of thinking, of processing emotions I couldn't yet name. The soil, soft and yielding, reminded me that growth is messy, that roots sometimes break before they strengthen, and maybe that's exactly what we needed, a chance to dig in, to heal, to find new strength in brokenness. Elijah was quiet at first. He avoided conversation, preferring to sit in his room, headphones on, music filling the space between us. But I didn't pressure him. I let him be. I gave him the space to process, to feel, to grieve. One evening, I knocked on his door softly. "Elijah, can we talk?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. He nodded. We sat on his bed, the room dimly lit by the soft glow of a desk lamp. "Mum," he said after a long pause, "I feel lost. Everything feels different now. I don't know who to trust." I took his hand gently, squeezing it. "I know, sweetheart. I feel the same way, but we'll get through this together, one step at a time." And so we began to rebuild, slowly. Not everything needed words. Some days, just sitting together in silence, feeling each other's presence, was enough. Some days, we shared memories, old stories that reminded us of who we were before the hurt came in. And some days, we cried, quietly, together. And that, I realized, was a kind of healing. My husband, he tried. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but he tried. There were conversations, long, awkward, painful conversations. He admitted his mistakes, without excuses, without justifications. And that honesty, as difficult as it was to hear, felt like a small step towards something we could call hope. I found myself thinking a lot about love in those days. Not the kind of love that exists only in comfort and warmth, but the kind that perseveres even when it hurts. The kind that doesn't give up, even when the world seems against you. The kind that chooses to stay, even when betrayal has made everything feel unsafe. One morning, I was making breakfast when Elijah came into the kitchen. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the counter, watching me. "Mom," he said finally, "thank you for staying, for believing in us, even when it was hard." I felt a lump in my throat. I smiled softly, tears pricking my eyes. "Always, sweetheart. I'll always believe in you." It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, days when anger bubbled up, when resentment felt stronger than hope, days when I wanted to retreat into myself and forget the world outside. But those days passed, and slowly, the house began to feel like home again. Not the same home as before, but a home still full of love, still capable of laughter, still capable of warmth. I began to notice small moments of joy again. Elijah laughing over a joke in the living room, Hannah humming while making her homework, my husband fixing the leaky faucet without asking, a quiet gesture of care. These small things mattered more than I could have imagined. They reminded me that life doesn't stop when betrayal happens. It continues, and sometimes, it continues with grace, if you let it. I also learned something important about forgiveness, not the kind that erases wrongdoing, not the kind that pretends hurt didn't exist, but the kind that allows you to release the weight of bitterness, that lets you breathe again, that gives space for love to grow, despite pain. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for them, it was for me. There were quiet evenings when I sat by the window, cup of tea in hand, watching the garden bloom, and I thought about everything I had been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the fear, the anger, the sadness, and I realized that through it all, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. Elijah started opening up more. We would talk about his dreams, his fears, his plans. I listened, guiding him gently, reminding him that mistakes, ours and others, don't define who we are. What defines us is how we respond, how we grow, how we keep moving forward. I began talking to my husband too, not just about what had happened, but about us, about the future, about rebuilding trust in small, deliberate ways. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to repair, but we both wanted it, and that shared desire, as fragile as it felt, was enough to start mending the cracks. I started noticing little things about myself too. I realized how strong I had become, not the kind of strength that raises your voice or demands justice, but the quiet, steady strength that sits with pain and still chooses compassion, the kind of strength that allows you to hold your heart tenderly while facing the reality of life. I wrote in my journal every day, letting the emotions flow onto paper. Anger, sorrow, fear, hope, all of it. And when I read my words later, I saw the journey unfolding, from hurt to understanding, from despair to patience, from brokenness to quiet resilience. One afternoon, I found myself in Elijah's room again. He was studying, but he looked up at me with a small tentative smile. "Mom, I think I'm okay now," he said softly. I knelt beside him, hugging him gently. "I know you are, sweetheart. And if you're not, that's okay too. We'll keep moving forward together." I started understanding the importance of acceptance, not acceptance of betrayal, not acceptance of mistakes, but acceptance of life as it is, with all its imperfections. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means seeing clearly, choosing carefully, and continuing to love. My husband and I began small rituals to reconnect. Simple things like making tea together in the morning, sharing a quiet walk in the garden, leaving notes for each other on the fridge. They weren't grand gestures. They didn't erase the past, but they reminded us that we could still care, still nurture, still build something meaningful together. I also learned to let go of what I couldn't control. I couldn't erase the past. I couldn't undo the mistakes. I couldn't take away the hurt. But I could choose how to respond. I could choose to live, to love, to hope. And in that choice, I found freedom. Some nights, I would sit quietly in the living room, listening to the soft hum of the house, the rain tapping against the windows, the distant sounds of traffic, the faint rustle of leaves outside. And I realized that peace doesn't come from everything being perfect. Peace comes from learning to carry the imperfections gently, to live with them without letting them break you. I began noticing gratitude again, for Elijah's laughter, for Hannah's energy, for the quiet moments of connection with my husband, for the garden that never judged me, that kept growing despite neglect. Gratitude reminded me that even in the midst of pain, life still held beauty. Slowly, forgiveness grew too. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to see my husband as a flawed human being, as someone who had made mistakes, as someone who was trying. And that willingness created space for healing, space for trust to rebuild, space for love to return, even if cautiously. I began speaking openly with my children about emotions, about mistakes, about resilience. I wanted them to see that life is not always fair, that people can hurt us, intentionally or not, but that love, patience, and understanding are powerful tools that can guide us through the darkest moments. Some nights, Elijah and I would sit in the garden, the stars above us, the air cool and fresh. He would speak about his dreams, his hopes, his fears, and I would listen, holding his hand, reminding him gently that he was strong, that he was capable, that he was not defined by others' mistakes. And in those moments, I began to feel something I hadn't in weeks: hope, a quiet, steady hope that life, though fragile and unpredictable, could still be full of love, of connection, of meaning. I realized that the turning point, painful as it was, had taught me something invaluable. Life is not about avoiding pain. It's about embracing it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward anyway. It's about seeing clearly, loving fully, and holding your heart with courage, even when the world feels uncertain. The house began to feel like home again, not the same as before perhaps, but still ours. The laughter returned, soft at first, then louder. Meals became moments of conversation and warmth. Small gestures of care, long overlooked, were noticed and appreciated. And slowly, step by step, the threads of trust began to weave themselves back together. I looked at my children, at my husband, at the life we had built, and I understood something. We may never be perfect. We may never erase the mistakes, the betrayals, the moments of pain, but we can choose love. We can choose connection. We can choose healing. And in that choice, I found peace. Sitting by the window now, years later, I often think back to that day, the day I realized what I had almost lost, the day I saw the cracks in the life I thought was unshakable, the day I understood that love, even the deepest love, is fragile and must be tended to, gently, patiently, and without assumption. I see Elijah and Hannah laughing together in the living room, their voices filling the house with warmth. I see my husband reading quietly in his chair, a small smile on his lips as he sips his tea, and I feel something I didn't feel for a long time: peace. Life taught me a lesson I will carry with me always. Pain does not define us. Mistakes do not define us. Betrayal does not define us. What defines us is how we respond, how we grow, how we choose to keep our hearts open even when the world feels heavy. I learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting, and it is not about excusing the wrongs done to us. It is about freeing ourselves from the weight of anger, from the pull of bitterness, from the heaviness of resentment. Forgiveness is a quiet choice to release the past, so we can fully embrace the present. I also learned the importance of presence, being truly present with those we love, noticing the small gestures, listening with our hearts, speaking gently with understanding. These are the threads that weave the fabric of family. Neglect them, and even the strongest relationships can fray. And yet, I also learned that love is resilient. It bends, it wavers, it stretches, but with patience, honesty, and care, it can endure, it can heal, and sometimes it can even grow stronger after pain, tempered by the trials it has faced. I do not pretend that the past never happened. I do not pretend that the hurt and the betrayal were insignificant, but I have chosen to live beyond them. I have chosen to focus on the laughter, the quiet moments of connection, the ordinary days that carry extraordinary meaning when shared with love. Every morning I wake up and I see my family. I see the life we have, imperfect and fragile as it may be, and I remind myself, quietly, gently, that life is not about holding on to the past. It is about moving forward, with grace, with compassion, and with hope. If there is one thing I have learned through all the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the tears, and the quiet reflections, it is this: cherish what you have, love fully, and forgive, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Life is too short, and love is too precious to let pain linger and fester. And so I sit here, looking out at the garden, listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on my hands. I smile softly, because I have survived, I have loved, I have learned, and I have found peace in the gentle rhythm of life, imperfect, uncertain, yet full of quiet beauty. The day I realized what I had almost thrown away was painful. It was heart-wrenching. It was a turning point I never wished for, but it also became a day of awakening, a day that reminded me that life is fleeting, that love must be nurtured, and that even after heartbreak, there is still hope, and in that hope, I find myself